So, I'm quite excited at going into level three or part three of the state of our minds. A wonderful topic, and to be fair, we could go on and on and on. Neuroscientists and psychotherapists have been studying this wonderful thing called the brain and the mind for years and years and years. And I don't know if we've got a full consensus on what it is and how it works properly, but there are some fundamental pieces that we've established, and hopefully that can help us today. As I've stated in previous sessions, the biggest current disease burden on the planet is not coronavirus, it is mental health issues. It's the number one disease burden. It's not cancer. It's not diabetes. It actually is mental health. And so if we can start to fathom a bit more about how the brain works and what's taking place in our minds and in our unconscious memory and so on, we then have a chance of making some decisions about the decisions that have been made automatically. So it gives us a chance to put an intervention in place to think about what we're thinking about and perhaps make a change. So just before we really get started, I have a question, just a simple question that I'd like to put to you. Let me pull it up. Last week, Tuesday and Thursday, I did talk about unconscious emotions. Simple question, have you heard of that before? Have you heard of that statement before? This is a question that's come up in our poll. It should be on your screen. And I'm just wondering if you could give me a quick yes/no answer. Unconscious emotions. Excellent. So of those who've, it looks like a neck and neck race. That's interesting. Let me share the findings. Yep. Okay. Share results. Yep. Okay. So 50-50. Very interesting. I'd like to know from someone in the room who said, yes, they've heard about it previously, what they've understood it to mean. Unconscious emotions. What are they? Please help me. And we can go on. I'll explain a bit more about what I believe it is and so on. But it'd be good to have that pre-session conversation. So please go ahead. Who has heard of it? If you could just give me a thumbs up and I'll be able to just quickly get your point of view on it. It doesn't have to be an expert opinion or point of view, it's just what you've perceived it to have meant. Okay, Ricky's heard of it. Unconscious emotion. Well, come on, there's a few more that said they've heard of it. And I've only got one hand up. Okay.
Its emotions are in our subconscious. So we may be facing a particular situation and we have a particular outward emotional response. But what might be driving that is subconscious emotion that, have been anchored from previously, that might be driving the way that you behave or react to a situation.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you to you both. And if you recall, last week we talked about the amygdala and the neocortex. There's a part of our brain that does the critical thinking and the processing and a bit more perception. And then there's the amygdala, which is actually, I wouldn't use the word primitive, but that's usually the word associated with it. It usually observes the negative before the positive. So it sees a snake when it's only a stick, and that's usually for your protection. All right, so that's just a bit of a recap. So I do want to go a bit more into this unconscious emotions and what is happening to us and why we are the way we are, perhaps. And you know, sometimes we think it's all about character and a particular set of rules to follow, then we will all be all right. But deep down, intrinsically, there's this conflict taking place. So between the ages of 3 to around 7 years old is when that prefrontal cortex, that neocortex actually starts to really develop. Prior to that, the amygdala is being developed a lot earlier. So that instinctive, natural response is developed in our amygdala. And then, you know, that's why I said a child could have experienced something deeply traumatic that they've not been able to describe because their processing, the critical thinking and the perception side of their brain hasn't been developed yet. I mentioned about some parents, you know, maybe traumatizing a child, beating that child at an early age. And unfortunately, in many of the cultures represented on this platform, it could have happened to us. And it becomes an embedded subconscious response to particular stimuli and triggers. So that part of our brain that operates in that perceptive and critical thinking side, that neocortex, that gets developed around the ages of 3 to 7, functions at a particular brainwave. And those brainwaves are not necessarily present or active in younger children because they're still in that dreaming state, that imaginary state, that sleep state. They're not critical thinkers as yet. The emotional intelligence has not been developed. Usually it starts around 7 to 9 years old. So 6 to 9, thereabouts. So the intelligence attached to an emotion is not usually there in a young child, but the emotional memory is there in a child, but they've not been able to articulate or associate the emotion with that intelligence to describe what's gone on. So hence behaviors can be formed in a very young age without much understanding as to why that behavior is there. So back to the neocortex. As I mentioned, it deals with a lot of our decision making, and it only accounts for approximately 10% of our brain's function, but yet it's the thing that separates us from other animals. It's that heightened brilliance, that perceptive, processing, creative element of who we are as humans. It takes up around 10% of our brain capacity. The rest is done in our midbrain and in amygdala and other areas, which really deals with habit forming and the unconscious behavior. Let's move on. So let me give you an example of how a brain state or a state of mind can be created. I'm going to give you a bit of a story just to imagine this scenario. So let's say, for example, there's this lady called Jane. She's a mother of two children aged 3 and 5. And Jane has been forced to manage her home in a particular way that she's not been used to. And that's simply because her partner has lost his job and more recently twisted his ankle whilst playing football. And usually he would do the shopping run and take the children with him. But on this particular occasion, he couldn't move. So Jane happens to be quite frustrated that morning because she felt She's taken on another person's role. She's pressed out of measure. This month, the credit card bill was higher than normal. There's talks of recession. She herself is a bit worried about her company downsizing. And, you know, she left the house in a pretty frustrated state because she had an argument with her husband because she felt he wasn't doing enough to find a new job. So the two youngest children go along with her to the shopping mall, and her youngest son, Richard, was actually quite ill. He had a common cold. And her 5-year-old, Isabel, just seems to be non-stop talking. And, you know, actually quite annoying. When you're frustrated and the child just keeps talking at you and you just think, oh, please, just stop. So whilst Jane was processing her adult conversation, her adult challenges, she was creating a strategy for her life. She was still quite emotional and overwhelmed. And she was still thinking, how am I going to get over this? What do I do? But here's the challenge. Whilst the two siblings, her children, felt or appeared to be excessively loud, they were constantly demanding things. Mummy, can I have this? Mummy, that, mummy, can I have that? And the child is absolutely not aware of those adult, quote unquote, conversations taking place in Jane's mind. The child is absolutely not emotionally attached to Jane's emotions. So as the right of a child, they ask for what they want, right? They just say, Mummy, can I have? Mummy, can I have? But it comes to a point in the midst of Jane's frustration. She yells at her 5-year-old daughter, who constantly was pushing for this particular doll. And I'm sure you've all experienced it, where there's a toy, whether it's the sweets, whether it's the latest dress or gown or whatever, a child, a car, whatever it is, that persistence that a child has when they're asking for something can be quite gnawing, especially if you are discombobulated with how life is treating you. So Jane shouts at Isabel and she said, I've told you to be quiet. You don't deserve that thing right now. Your behavior has been bad and I'm sick of it. You see, here's where the challenge starts. As far as Isabel is concerned, all she hears is, I'm bad, I'm not good enough, I'm undeserving, and quite frankly, I make my mum sick. So Isabel starts forming this behavioral state, and she could spend the rest of her life unconsciously living out those statements that her mother has pressed in onto her in just one moment. And that state, that psychology can be quite self-sabotaging, especially when the threat of success comes to Isabel's way. She could think, I'm undeserving, I'm not good enough, I'm bad, etc., etc. So here is a fact. I call it the undisputed law of psychotherapy and personal development. And this law states that you will never rise above the opinion than the one you have of yourself. You will never rise above the opinion you have of yourself. Ooh, that's a deep one. And perhaps some of those opinions have been formed emotionally before you were 7 years old. where that intelligence, the rationale, has not been kicked in yet. It's a space where you question now, did I get the love I needed from the people I needed it from? Now we can ask that question. Before 7, we can't necessarily articulate it, but we experience it. So that was the first law, the undisputed law of psychotherapy and personal development, which also mirrors the first law of relationships, which is no one person, no human can ever love you more than you really love yourself. Think about that one. Yes, you've got maternal love and paternal love, and those things are amazing. But if you have all the love in the world bestowed upon you and you don't love yourself, that love that's been shared upon you doesn't mean much to you. You might think, oh, well, it's their duty. Oh, well, mum loves me, big deal. It's her job. She ought to. She brought me in this world. But if you don't have that love for yourself, how can you actually really, really, really appreciate love from someone else? But if there's a question in your mind around how much love you received, especially pre-7, then that might be a condition that's been exacerbated through your life, and then you wonder why you don't show love. Perhaps you were never showed love in the way you thought you should have received it, especially from the people you needed it from. So here's a point I would like you to note down. Environment usually wins over will or intention. Environment usually wins over will or intention. Let's say that another way. Our intention will always be beaten by environment over time. Let's look at it this way then. All right, give you another scenario. Let's say you love classical music and you really cannot stand pop music. You think it's tacky, it's basic, it's for the commoners, it's beneath you. And you get a job in the local shopping mall. Not the same one that Jane went to, but just another shopping mall. And on the shop floor, they constantly play the top hits, top 40 top hits on a CD that just keeps recycling. After 40 songs, you hear it again. Yeah? So you may hear that CD 3 or 4 times a day. And it really doesn't matter what you're consciously thinking about. Because after around 3 days of constantly hearing the music repeated, you will start to tap your feet to the beat. And then you know what? After about 5 days, you may start singing one of the songs in the shower. Because our brains have been built to be programmed. And we don't get a choice as to whether or not we're programmed. We are designed and we are programmable by design. The only thing we can do is choose how we would like to be programmed. I'm just trying to really emphasize this thing around state of mind. You could have all the self-help material you want. You could quote positive affirmations from now till the foreseeable future. And you can interlace those affirmations with positive declarations and be very intentional about your future. Guess what? You can even stand in front of a mirror and say to yourself why you believe in yourself. And these are intentions, and that's your will. But if you're surrounded by people who remind you constantly of why you're not good enough, or why your behavior is bad, or why you're undeserving, the chances are you won't meet your intention. Very, very powerful stuff. It's called the law of conformity. You can write that one down, law of conformity. And that law of conformity states that most people attempt not to conform to particular stereotypes and shared identities. The more that they try not to conform to those stereotypes and shared identities, the more they actually do conform to them. And that is because of environmental conditioning. So let's look at it this way. If you hang around 9 recreational drug users every day, and they're just your best friends, they're your besties, you just hang around them, the chances are, because of the law of conformity, you will become the 10th recreational drug user. But the antithesis is true. Conversely, if we was to hang around with 9 positive people that hold you to account and help you to design and shape your future, they hold up a mirror to reflect your greatness, boosting your confidence, fueling your dreams rather than attempting to kill them, you're likely to become the 10th positive person. That's the law of conformity, because we appreciate our bodies are tuned to be programmed. So I want to share 3 final tips with you this morning before we open up, because today we really do want to get into the nitty-gritty of this conversation. 3 things to help you shift your paradigm and to change your state of mind. Okay? To help you use your 10% of your brain in that neocortex to help reprogram that 90% slow moving, strong but sometimes wrong part of your brain. First tip, number 1, stop putting the wrong things in. Sounds obvious, right? We are adaptation creatures. Our bodies adapt to environment. So no matter how much layers of clothing you want to put on, if you're not appropriately properly addressed and you walk out in the freezing cold weather, your body is going to adapt to that environment of cold. So whether you're sitting in front of a TV all day long or you're in the gym 24/7, the body learns to adapt to its environment. And it's the exact same thing that goes on in our minds. So the 2 biggest influences of our minds is mainstream media and our peer groups. Very interesting. A lot of mainstream media and information, whether it be basic, the news, sports and entertainment, news and current affairs, is designed to stimulate the amygdala and influence the amygdala. And remember, I said the amygdala notices the negative before the positive. It's the part of the brain designed to keep you safe. But what the mainstream news or media does, it keeps you normal, keeps you ordinary, it keeps you average. Not bad, but definitely not good. Okay, nice, all very similar words. It's not designed to stimulate you into active growth. So the first thing you need to do is stop programming yourself with why the world isn't working, or why the world is in a chaotic state, or why the world functions the way it does, and that becomes our mind state. So stop putting the wrong things in. When I talked about peer groups, there's some things that you can't change, like your family, your siblings, your parents. You can't change who they are. So what we can do is start to make a decision to love your family, the ones that you can't change. But you certainly can choose your friends. You certainly can choose your partners. So those things that you can change, you have to, in order to stop putting the wrong things in. So that's the first tip. The second one sounds similar, but it's the opposite. Start putting the right things in. Imagine you have this natural compass in you, which is located in your 10%, that wants to think positively, wants to grow, wants to be ambitious, wants to be of use. We have to start thinking about what we're thinking about. We have to start putting the right things in. Think about the books you're reading. What are you reading? What about these wonderful things called podcasts? What about Zoom chats? Do you need to be in all of them? Are they that good for you? And we live in a world that is full of resources, provided you can get access to the internet. There's a lot of good resources readily available. Great inspirational videos on YouTube and so on and so forth. So what you've got to do is to start putting in the right things. Make space in your day, in your creativity, in your mind, for the things that will positively impact you. What kind of information is around you that could support your potential? What information and people can support your greatness and where you want to go? So it's very important. That's the key too, to start putting the right things in. Information is readily available. If you make a deliberate decision to put the right things in, you'll be hooked onto your life's agenda. If you don't make that deliberate decision, remember I talked about programming, you'll be hooked into someone else's program for your life by default. So it requires a deliberate effort to start putting the right things in. And the third thing I'll say, final thing I'll say now, is to get the things out that shouldn't be in there. That requires work, real work. And that's where you may need some professional help. Work with a decent mentor or a coach that will understand the minefield, let's put it another way, or the field of your mind. Someone who isn't just after your money by offering token and easy exercises, but someone who is paying attention to what's required, someone who could help you observe those unconscious patterns that are taking place in your life, that are causing you disruption, distress, disillusionment, distrust, and more importantly, you're discombobulated. So work with someone who's going to work with you. I'll give you a quick example. I spoke to someone recently and they said they needed some more time management skills. And after drilling down a bit more, I realized it wasn't time management skills that they needed, but they were dealing with rejection issues. They couldn't deal with the feelings of rejection by saying no. So yes, they said yes to too many things. And they filled up their diary and didn't have space in their time for more of the important things or the things that they wanted to do. Could this be a condition that they developed before they were 7 years old, where their parents told them no, and a feeling of rejection overwhelmed them? Could that have been developed into an unconscious emotion that creates a pattern that becomes a way of living for you? If you recall, we did talk about saying yes to your no months ago, probably 3 months ago now. Remember I said, don't let your mouth overload your back. Learn to say no. So what I want us to do is think about some of these unconscious patterns, these unconscious memories, and these unconscious emotions. Let's work on them. Let's identify them. Let's observe them. And when we start to work on ourselves, and once we become the best version of ourselves, as far as we know it, because once we get more information, we could potentially improve a bit more. But the best version of ourselves that we can be currently, we will then start to become an example. Someone mentioned this term living epistle yesterday. Fantastic conversation. We will then become an example, but also an invitation to others to observe the possibilities in their own lives, to start doing their own excavating, to own introspective thoughts as to what patterns are in their life and how they got there and what can be done about it. You know, how they're going to dig into their own subconscious mind and start to eradicate the negative emotional patterns. The concept of being an example and an invitation is so important because it's so much more powerful than an imposition. No one really creates sustainable change simply because they've been told to. So after that point where we start to change ourselves or get some help to change, we'll have a real chance to change this world because we have changed, and therefore we have a chance to make a difference. So that's my points this morning. I'm really hoping that we can dig in a bit more and have this conversation. So I was going to solicit some thumbs up and some hand claps, but you've done it for me. Thank you so much. Thank you. Brilliant. I love these conversations. As I said before, if I wasn't doing what I am doing now, I probably would have been a neuroscientist, because I'm fascinated at how this bunch of flesh and stuff works and how important it is, and how we've even been conditioned to just deny it and treat it as if it's nothing, but yet it's so powerful, so precious. But then we form states of mind that create these behavioral rhythms, and sometimes we're just stuck in that rhythm and we don't know why. So let's have that conversation. I'm going to look at the notes now, see that you guys have been having a conversation. So you know, I would love everyone to just get involved, and let's talk about these states of being, how we can potentially look at some of these emotional patterns. I've just been reading the comments, and Liza, you've mentioned something quite fascinating. Liza, are you able to just even say what you've said in the comments and share it? And welcome to you all the way from the Philippines. Oh, we're taking over the world. We are, you know, we're taking over the world. Welcome, Liza. Are you Would you be kind enough to share your thoughts?
Okay. Thank you for sharing that information about the unconscious mind. So, uh, I, I just realized that an adult, uh, the behavior patterns of an adult person, whether it's healthy or maladaptive, um these behaviors are shaped by the unconscious emotions built since childhood. Specifically, you mentioned like 3 to 7 years old, the crucial years of, I believe, the human development. And then it builds our core belief like not being good enough, I'm worthless, I'm I'm not I'm ugly, I'm not good, and mostly uh, maladaptive patterns. What's in the unconscious mind mostly are the maladaptive patterns of thinking, feeling, which are being manifested in their behaviors. And as you mentioned early on during this session, you mentioned like mental health is the number one disease because I would like to believe that um, a lot of us, or a lot of people in this universe, the childhood issues are not being dealt with until they become adults. And so we have numerous adults who are problematic in organizations, in their families. Uh, uh, for one, in their families, starting in their families, maybe in their marriage, and then their families eventually when they have children, and then they go out to the community, to their neighborhood, to their workplaces, and to a bigger community. So it's kind to me it's kind alarming to realize these things.
Yes.
If there are a number of us with unresolved issues, and I'm glad to hear from you that it would help for these individuals to bring these issues in therapy.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, thank you very
Oh,
much.
brilliant.
I
Thank you.
am enlightened.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much, Liz. And your point, I think, is absolutely right. Sometimes we're walking around traumatized and we've learnt to disguise these behaviors, or we hide them thinking that they won't erupt. But we've never really dealt with them because they've been impressed in us. And we've never really had to pay attention. Sometimes we have a behavioral flaw and, you know, we've been so conditioned to say, well, that's how I am. And we're not investigating, well, is that good enough? Why are you just the way you are? So a lot of these things have happened to us. Listen, not many of our parents are trained psychotherapists or counselors, and so our parents are not necessarily, someone said children don't come with manuals, so we can't go around blaming our parents even if there was no quote unquote deliberate abuse. Sometimes parents just didn't know how to parent. We all make mistakes if we were parents, and like I said in the session, it could be just one moment where the mother shouts at the daughter and says something, and then that whole framework has been embedded into that psychology of that young girl, and then it starts to act out in life. And that's where we learn to compensate or overcompensate for our inadequacies. And some of those inadequacies are just concepts of what we think we are, rather than our potential or our possibilities. It's the negative side of what we've been informed of who we are. So just because our brains are so powerful and we hold those thoughts in contention for such a long time, there's that front side of the brain that informs this big Imagine this little finger informing this big side of the brain. It's just going for it, but the big side of the brain seeking to dominate it. And you're fighting against it with your neocortex, your positive thinking, your positive affirmations, and this side's saying, well, no, I'm not good enough, and it's pushing it. If we can learn to rewire this side by using those 3 steps I mentioned, then our lives can actually start to change. We can start to correct some of those conversations. Now, some of us are in our 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s perhaps, and even older. And it's taken 50 years or 40 years or 20 years of programming. It doesn't just go overnight. It's a transition. It's a process. It's a deliberate act. But just as important to recognize that when that young girl in the shopping mall was told off by her mother, and all she could see was, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, I'm bad, I'm undeserving. That psychological impact happened immediately, and then she started to believe it. And I'm saying we can have psychological impacts that happen immediately today that you can then start to believe. If you just choose to believe some of the positive and brilliant elements of who you are. So thank you. Hi, Madhu. I see you said you're late. No apology necessary. Welcome. Lurleen, thank you for your comments. Fiona, Ricky's enticing you to speak, and I think we're going to have to hear from you as well. But is there anyone else who possibly could share having to deal with these emotional patterns, who's possibly gone on that journey of saying, you know what, I can change this, or I need to change this, or I've observed this? Is there anyone that would like to possibly help us all have this conversation? And you know what, we've all got them. None of us are immune to the programming. And I tell you what, if you just listen to the TV all day long, you will be programmed. It's just how we are built. So if we can be programmed, and we have been programmed thus far, we now need to change the programming information. Okay? We have to start again. So stop letting certain things in. Put the right things in. And now we've got to get rid of some stuff. So who should I? Okay, there was a tie there. Dr. Yasidi and Nurse Funmi came at the same time. Can I quickly go to Dr. Yasidi? Thank you. Good morning to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm only laughing because I knew she was going to put her hand up. Oh, wow. Mike, what can I say? I think the topic you've brought up today, and I'm looking forward to this going on to the YouTube link for the cafe, because I think there's so many people I know that need to listen to what you've said today. One of them is me. And I know that Auntie Funmi is going to nod her head when I say what I'm about to say, but I feel being on the cafe has challenged some of my negative unconscious mindsets. Every time you call my name, my heart rate goes to like 120 because I'm someone who, although I'm very chatty, I am actually very, very shy and don't like speaking. Even if I want to say something, I would hide. And being on this cafe has had to challenge me in that, because growing up, I always used to hear things like, oh, you talk too much, you talk too much, you talk too much. So I don't like speaking at all. And it's just something we were actually talking about, myself and Auntie Funmi, at the weekend with my husband. And he's like, yeah, I like it. Every time I hear her speaking on the cafe, I'm like, yes, talk, because I'm having to get rid of that mindset. Because sometimes I have things I want to say, but then I hold back because I think, oh, no, you talk too much, you don't have anything good to say. And if you ask me, where did that come from? I can't actually tell you. You know, I think back to growing up, my parents always encouraged us to speak. You know, I grew up in a family where even when they're having a family meeting, mommy and daddy, you know, as the first child, my contribution was very much welcomed. but for some reason I don't like speech. So I don't actually know where that comes from. But it is something that I feel very much challenged about even now, you know, as an adult, as a mom in my career, to step out of my shell. But how this shell got there, I don't know. And what you said, especially about, you know, the 3 tips to change a state of mind, you know, stop putting the wrong things in, start putting the right things in, is something that I do, but I'm not aware that I do it. But hearing you say those things made me realize the impact of them. You know, there are times when I would be listening to the example you gave about working in the mall. I remember when I used to live in London, and I got a job next in the Lewisham shopping center. And by the end of that job, I knew every single top 40 hit, whether I liked it or not. And I would start singing songs, and I'm like, where did I learn that from? But I realize that now, and it's just, you know, in science talk about osmosis or diffusion, how things just move without you being aware of them. And it's so true. And I think as adults, we need to be more aware of that now, because we're in a position where we not only have impact on ourselves, but others around us. You know, as parents, we need to be mindful of the things we put around our children, because they are also affected by those things, whether it's what they watch, where they go, what they play with, what we say to them, the people we allow around them. All these things have an impact, and we need to be protective as well as protect them from the wrong things, but also sow the right seeds into our children with the things that we say. Whether it's cautioning them, encouraging them, knowing that our words have huge impact on people around us, irrespective of their age. So yeah, that's my.
Wow, fascinating. Thank you, Doctor. And you know, you've mentioned that point around being that caretaker and that cover over our children. What are they listening to? I mean, thank God, you know, my boys, if they're playing this music and they're swearing it, they turn it off when I walk around the corner. They actually do. But my question is, why are you playing it in the first place? And it's not that they're going out listening directly to negative stuff. It's just the music of the day. And some of it is just a bit negative. But we're just wondering, what impact does that have on that particular person, the young man? What's the behavior that changes because of the music? Thank you, Dr. Yasidi. For me, please go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Oh, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Yesterday, you're so good. I'm telling you, we need to hear from you. You always say a lot of good things. Don't be getting distressed when you're called. You're very fantastic. Love you. And I was just gonna say, when when I was growing up, my unconscious emotion starts from when I was growing up, and I agree with you. It's something that is being impacted on us, and it stays with us. As a first child of 9 children from my mom and dad, it was impacted to me that you have to be a superwoman. So I carried the burden of every one of my siblings. And that, I grew up with that. And that's me. And they, even when we're older, they all come into me like, you know, in every angle. And then it got to a point that I felt that I still have to carry on doing a lot of things for them, because that's the way I was brought up. That's what was impacted in me. And when something happened and I said no, they don't want to take no. They take no as very, very, very negative. And sometimes they take my no as unforgiveness. But until when I started this cafe, I struggle with that. And I'm thinking, am I bad to them? I love them. I looked after them. But am I not allowed to say no to certain things? But when I started this cafe, then I realized that no, I'm all right. I'm just setting boundaries. That's all I'm doing. And it's really good for me. I don't need to listen to what I don't want to listen to. I would do what makes me feel okay, makes me happy. And just yesterday, I was saying to my mom, she was complaining about something. And I said, Mom, I do not need to get involved with this. this person you're talking about, my brother, is 44 years old. He can handle his own life. Why do I have to handle the life for him? Let me rest, mom. And she started laughing after. But normally she would get annoyed about it, but no, she doesn't get annoyed. And I can put my foot up and relax. And I'm reflecting every day on cafe. And I was even telling one of my friends, she said to me, oh my goodness, you've changed so much. You're just so chill. What is happening? I said, well, you need to come on to this cafe and come and learn how to shape your life, because you can give your own life rest. You don't have to run around, just rest. And we just need to learn. Yeah, those things, unconscious things have been impacted on us, but we can change it. As you said, we can take it out, we can remove them. And we have to literally seek help and be ready to put them aside and move on, because it's only one life. And we need to focus on one life, and don't let anybody take our life off us. Just we need to help ourselves. That's the bottom line. We need to be ready and help ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you for me. And that power in saying no is so liberating. I love what you say. Thank you so much. I'm just wondering, ladies and gentlemen, is there something we need to do to ourselves fundamentally important? We've talked about this in a previous session, but it was always in the context of doing it to someone else. And it's around forgiveness. I'm wondering what can help settle some of those internal arguments that we have with ourselves and form and inform our behavior. And more importantly, when we resolve to conclude, well, this is what happened to me, this is why I am the way I am, or I don't know what's happened to me, but we do things that are inappropriate or wrong. I'm wondering if today would be a good day to just say, you know what, I cannot change my behavior thus far. But before I go and forgive anyone, let me forgive myself. What a powerful posture that could be. Let me forgive myself. Let me be whole. And from that place, and now listen, to forgive yourself may take a season. It will be vicissitudes, ups and downs, and guilt and freedom and reasons to remember, and then reasons to be free. And so forgiveness is a season. It's not an instant thing, but it's the decision you can make today, but the working out of it takes a while. And then, but maybe that's a good place to start today. I've seen in some of the comments how parents have treated us. And sometimes the way parents treat us is how they were treated. It's that learned behavior, it's that generational trauma. My dad, he's 85 years old. He was raised by his grandmother, who was a daughter of a slave. So she only knew certain rules, hardcore, strict rules. Yeah? And many of those rules were infused into my dad's behavior. So now I understand some of his behavior, and I'm wondering how much of that is in me. My family would probably say all of it. So what do I need to do to get rid of some of that behavior? Especially when I weren't responsible for it. It happened to me, pre-7. They say the first 1,000 days of a child's life is the most important. We specialize as an organization for helping parents with children to 0 to 5. That's been one of our major contracts this year. It's fundamentally important, as Dr. Yesidi said, around creating that right environment, the home learning environment. It's not just about reading, chatting and playing. It's creating that environment, because environment has more power than will. It can enforce your decisions. Over time, environment will always win over will. So if you're in the right environment, you heighten your chances of success. The wrong environment, the wrong people, the wrong space and place diminishes your opportunities. So I would like to hear from Fiona. Good morning to you, Fiona. I know you've touched on some of these things and these rhythms before of life. Could you help us? Thank you.
Good morning, Mike. Morning, all. Help you. You have covered a lot of ground here, and very, very well said. All of it. Where to start? I totally agree. Environment is one of the greatest ignored influences of who we are. People stop at the argument nature or nurture, and actually never really examine, really the depth of the environment, the impact of the environment. And it is about what you take in without being aware of it, it's in the background, so you don't even acknowledge it. You don't acknowledge its presence. And for children, this is particularly impactful. We went through, 2-3 generations of TVs and videos and games, babysitting young children, and their thinking is skewed. It's impacted quite severely. They have no clue what reality is, because it's been shaped by false reality. The environment that they were surrounded by from a very young age was false. It's not about real life. And unless you recognize that and counteract it while it's happening, this is what they bring forward into present day, into their future. And so when they can't now tap into emotions, tap into have empathy, have compassion, have consideration, have manners even, it's no surprise, because they don't learn that from the environment, or they didn't learn that from the environment that they were in. They needed to have had that supplanted, that environment supplanted by input, real life human input, repeated behavior, consistent behavior and teaching and learning, so that they could be more rounded as they grow. Not having a go at parents, I'm really not. It sounds as if I am, but I'm not. It's that people don't recognize this, and it's unfortunate it's not taught. So parents they can't see it. They can't see it, but later down the line, you have children who are actually emotionally stunted, for want of a better word, and developmentally they're not where they should be. That's just one aspect, and the acclimatization that happens. It's a natural process. We live to adapt. We are born to survive. We are created to survive. So whatever the environment gives us, eventually we will adapt to it. We will acclimatize ourselves to survive. And we will be letting go of the things that we held true to ourselves without even realizing it, because the focus all becomes survival. And we change. We change externally, certainly, but somewhere within us, the essence of who we are battles to come out. And when that battle happens, then we're in a war. And in many aspects of this could be a spiritual war. No sense in veering away from that, because, we carry the spirit within us, whether we acknowledge it or not. So it will become a spiritual war. And we won't be recognizing what we are battling with, except that we are not in tune with ourselves. In psych speak, we're incongruent. So we're not displaying what we're feeling. It doesn't match. And sometimes we recognize this and don't know what to do with it. And sometimes it tears us apart and we can't function We can't operate as we want to. And again, we acclimatize and we absorb all of these maladaptive behaviors. I think, Lizzie mentioned that? We absorb these and these become our normal and our truth. But it's not. It's somebody else's. It's another person's, another environment. It's something that we need to shed and find the real us. And that can only be done with help.
Thank you, Fiona. I think you've touched on something there. When we adapt to that environment that is been quite reductive, and we wrestle with our environment versus the stuff that's in us that we want to be. And I think that could be the start of where some of these mental health issues take place, where we are stuck in a moment and all of these things are happening inside of us. So I've had this thought this morning around the human nervous system, and that intrinsically and fundamentally our nervous system is hardwired for comfort. But yet the essence of what makes us us, some call it the soul, is hardwired for growth. And so it's about managing those dynamic tensions between how good a comfort zone feels, and yet there's that innate calling of our potential, which lies outside of that comfort zone. And those two spaces are in direct contention, but it's happening in the same person. And so we have these vicissitudes, we have these peaks and troughs in how we feel about ourselves, much less anyone else. And these things are happening at the same time. They're happening at the same time, the same season. And hence why we learn to adapt into our environment, why it's very important to be in an environment where the thing that you want to be is permitted. There's that space for growth. There's space for the soul to be fed, rather than the negative impact that did actually happen to be fueled. There's some stuff, especially as we get older and our parents have gone on, or the person that offended us has passed away, and we can't go back and have that conversation and change it, then it becomes something that's internalized, and we become it. So this is what I'm wondering, how do we now start to reprogram? I know that we can go and seek help, but is there something we can do today to start that behavior change? Ricky, I'm going to hand to you to ask a question, because I think one of the things that we can do today, fundamentally important, is start that season of forgiveness. Not necessarily because we think they're deserving of forgiveness, but what positive impact forgiving has on us. It's a bit like love. It's an energy that you give. And like I said earlier, no one can love you more than you love yourself. But we ought to forgive others, especially if we want to be forgiven. And these are such emotive, big topics that it's not a quick self-help guide, but it starts today. The journey starts today. And like I said earlier on, there's a lot of resources, very good resources out there. We can't complain that we don't have the information. Some of it, though, is around will and intention and environment. So I think that's an important one. Pam, good morning to you. I'm glad you've joined us this morning, all the way from Burton. Pam, are you able to share any thoughts on what you've heard this morning, especially around some of those hidden emotions those unconscious emotions that actually can affect our way of being without us even knowing.
Yes, good morning, good afternoon, and it's great to rejoin the cafe. I have been working in the background and sort of multitasking, but it's great to be part of what you're talking about today. There are a number of things that can affect us in terms of our well-being, our mental health, our ability to engage and in healthy relationships with people. And it's interesting how I think you just, the last one, the last question around unforgiveness or forgiveness and how that really impacts us. When we forgive, it has to be a genuine act. It has to be a conscious act as well. As a believer, it is the power of God that helps us to do that. Because sometimes we can dismiss, or we can say, forget it, you know, I'll walk away, you know, but unless we've addressed something, then that thing festers. And it's a bit like a seed that's been planted. You can walk away, but you know, there are things in the environment that contribute to the growth of that seed actually coming forth and bringing forth fruit that you don't really want. So it's really, we do need to forgive, and it has to be a conscious decision, it has to be a healthy decision, because then that impacts our mental health and our well-being. So a number of things, you know, in terms of relationships, in terms of decisions that we make, yeah, and they impact on what we will do going forward. So yeah, I think that our mental well-being and our mental health state is really crucial, because it impacts. It's almost like a watering can. You know, things come in, but there's an outlet, and everything that comes out of us will impact the relationships that we have. So I don't know if that helps, but
Absolutely does. Absolutely does. Thank you so much for your contribution. What I've got from what you've said is that forgiveness needs to be an active, conscious decision, rather than just thinking, oh, I'll let it go, I'm not going to talk about it, it's done now. You're being deliberate in your side of the fence. You're forgiving, so that if that person has offended you and they don't want to apologize, that's their lot. But your side of the fence, you're cleansing, you're doing your emotional hygiene. And I think you've said something very, very valid. Let's see here. Madhu has said something very interesting, and I'd like to hear how it could potentially address, because Lurleen's talked about it, being traumatized as a child. And Madhu says, when you've been traumatized, very traumatized as a child, it does act as a barrier to our growth. My first thoughts is, you're absolutely right. But then how long does that barrier have to be there? And is there something you can do to take down that barrier that has been registered or built up in your psychology, in your brain, in your amygdala, especially? I mean, in your midbrain, where that history, those emotions, those habits are formed, where you think of a scenario and you associate a feeling to it. I agree, those barriers are there, but I believe we have the same perspicacity to get over it. We have the ability in the same brain that holds that pain and that emotive state. It's the same brain that could hold a positive state. And I'm saying that providing that our brains are not damaged through injury, it can be reprogrammed. It can be. so I'm saying be hopeful, Madhu. Create environments that feed the outcome you want, where we're not focusing on the history, the past, the pain, but we're focusing on the future. We're trying to create the better thing so that it's not transgenerational, that you won't pass on that psychology to the next gen or to your colleagues or to your peers. Because remember, there's that law, there's that the law I mentioned earlier on. Let me pull it back up. There we go. Sorry about that. The law of conformity. Very important to be in and around people that help you along. And again, I'm a big advocate for talking therapies, counseling, timeline therapy, psychotherapy. All of these things really do help. And then if you find that after a while of doing that, you need a coach or a mentor or someone that's going to hold you to account, I recommend doing that as well. So thanks for your contributions. I think it's such an important piece. It's a critical piece. I want us to think about what is currently programming us. I know we are all hearing about this wretched disease, COVID. And I'm just wondering how we are coping during lockdown with these things that program our thoughts and our behavior, and how much of that is going to be transferred into a habit later on. Are we going to become scared of people? Are we going to become scared if someone coughs? Are we going to be constantly, forever preferring to social distance? But any psychologist will tell you the damage that social distancing can have on a human, especially a child. If you socially distance a child, then they don't develop. What's happening to us? Are we being programmed? Just a thought, just a thought, just a thought. Welcome to Julia Hawthorne. And I think this may be your first time on the session. I'm not sure if it is, but if it is, welcome. Warm welcome to you. And I also would like to ask Liza, how did you hear about the platform? How did you hear about this Wellbeing Cafe all the way in the Philippines, Liza? How did you hear about us? If you're busy and you can't talk, just post it in the chat for me, please. I'd love to hear. Thank you. So, are we being programmed right now? What's programming you? Most of you are in this space where we're hearing positive information, which is part of your programming. And if you could do this often and repeat by listening to the videos, or if you want to share comments or post them in your own social media, if I've said something or anyone else has said something that's helped you along the way, share it with someone, because it might help with their programming. But is there some negative programming that you've observed? We've got 10 more minutes and I'd like to shift into that concept of negative programming that's bombarding you, shifting your conscious behavior, and then it will become a subconscious action. Who would like to go first? Uzoma, good to see you, my brother. How are you this morning? I know Uzoma's a critical thinker, and he probably uses a bit more than that 10% that the rest of us use in that neocortex. I'm just wondering, Uzoma, is there something that you've observed that you might think, wow, am I being programmed?
Sometimes it's hard to, I'll be honest, it's hard to tell. I do question a lot of things in terms of, you know, whether that is actually, we're gradually being moved in a certain direction, and in a sense, maybe just our own method of thinking is being kind of eroded. And yeah, that's why I'm kind of grateful that my wife kind of is, in a sense, sometimes opposite to me in that direction. So she brings another angle to that. I'm trying to find the balance in the middle. I don't know categorically the answer to that, because on the one hand, there's a lot of fear with an illness which is very real, and it's definitely having quite a dramatic effect on people. But where the balance is right now, who knows, maybe in retrospect we'll know better. I think coming onto the subject of what we're talking about, which was on the subject of forgiveness and how important and how critical that is as well, and how helpful that is for our own well-being and for our own ability to just move on with our lives, and how easy it is to kind of hold on to something, and how that holds us back. And my church pastor often says it's really difficult to move on to your future while you're still looking back on your past. And I think being able to forgive somebody is kind of holding on to your past in some way. And admittedly, there's almost like an emotional satisfaction of holding on to that, but how it just stops you from making the progress you really want to make with your life is kind of undeniable. And it's only when you almost have to, it's difficult to do, because you have to almost step out in faith. You have to trust that there's something better by letting go of your past and by letting go of what that feeling is. And it makes you vulnerable. It makes you kind of almost feel a little bit weak as well. But you have to trust that by becoming vulnerable for a short time, that you're actually going to be able to step out into a future where there's something better in front of you. So it's difficult. It's easy to teach, and the pain from some of the hurt things that we feel is quite real. But trusting that being able to let go of that and that the future is better is just where we kind of have to position ourselves. And that's why I totally co-sign and agree with you on the feeling of having to maybe sometimes go to a therapist to help with that process.
Yeah, thank you, Zoma. It's interesting. We can't be focused on our future whilst looking at our past as the priority. It's a bit like driving along the road and we look through our windscreen, but our rear view mirrors are there only for our safety and reference. We don't drive looking at our rear view mirror going forward, but it's in the same view space. And that little rear view mirror is useful when reversing and navigating turns and corners and so on. So yeah, let's look forward. Let's start being positive about our future. Fiona, please go ahead. Your hand is up.
Thanks, Mike. Something you said about being programmed during this time struck a chord with me, because even in the very beginning of all of the activity before it became a pandemic, the message had negative undertones to it, and not about the virus itself, but us, how we needed to operate. We were told negatively how we needed to be, rather than showing us positive moves forward, positive ways to move forward. And this is something I was speaking about, but people weren't really, because there was now an environment of fear, and there was all the talk was about consequences, not about benefits. And I believe we have very much been programmed to remain in that mode, even as we supposedly move forward. We're carrying this whole environment with us. You have children who are unable to go out to school when they were supposed to, because they were fearful of what's out there. They needed to stay in. It wasn't, mental health was not affected by staying home. It was affected by what was out there waiting for them. And I think the whole thing has been skewed to drive us in a particular direction and to keep us thinking in a particular way. And I link it back to times when the proposals have been made to have us chipped, to have us, with ID cards, with, that track us, and it's, for me, is very much being fulfilled by a lot of the elements that are the measures that are now being put into place, supposedly for our health, but are being put into place with consequences if you don't conform. So the programming, I believe, is there. Not, I'm not talking conspiracy. I'm just talking, you know, having a free thinking approach and understanding to what is being fed to us. Again, it's in tune with what you're saying today. Pay attention to your environment. Pay attention to what you're paying attention to. You know, get the whole story rather than the tidbits that are being fed through the newsreels and the you know, the flash, what they call it, the strips. And also what's being proposed as breaking news. It's not, it was there all along. It's just being fed to you in that way. You know, and I think as long as we educate ourselves fully, not just from one source, from many different sources, round out our knowledge, secure ourselves, we can move forward in a positive way. We can make decisions that affect us positively, even if it is a negative decision, as in it means that you do have to do what they're saying, but you do it consciously, you do it intentionally. You know what you're doing, why you're doing this. And you know, yeah, I'm gonna stop there, I think.
Thank you, Fiona. It's such a powerful piece that we're in. I can't believe we've run out of time. Okay, I'm going to recap with the 3 things that I said as the final point. First one, stop putting the wrong things in. Think about that one. Secondly, start putting the right things in. And then thirdly, get the things out that shouldn't be in there. We're talking about our brains, our minds, our emotions, our heart, or, you know, it's that whole thing that doesn't serve you. Work to get rid of, because it's like something that's gone off. I think one of the worst smells is meat when it's gone off. You know, you put it in the bin and you walk in the house and it's the bad smell. So metaphorically, some of us are going around with stuff that's gone off, and it's in our hearts, it's in our minds. We want to get rid of it. So we're practicing emotional hygiene. I'm going to end on this thing. Can you, if you are able to, just wrap your hands around your own body? I want everybody, if humanly possible, to do this, and just say, I love you and I forgive you. I will be kind to myself. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm looking forward to seeing you on Thursday. Same time. Have a wonderful day. Stay safe. Think well, live well, and be well. See you soon. Bye. Bye, everyone.